Morning, everybody. So I'm going to start with the legislation. So I'm going to give you an understanding of the legislation, which sets out the requirements, the obligations of the owners, which are to give notice, and also the completion. Moving on through the form of the commencement notice, and then the obligations on the Building Control Authority when the commencement notices come in. I'll go through the procedures to follow and how to use the BCMS and the validation process in building control. The timelines are the same, and then moving on to the outcomes that we hope to achieve at the end of this, which are be entered on the register, and then moving on through the construction stage, the inspections by either building control, the assigned certifier, the design team, and the ultimate outcome is to submit and gain your certificate of compliance and completion to enable the building to be put into use by the end user and the owner. So I'll start at the start, which is the, from building control perspective, is your commencement notices. So you have your planning, you have your decisions to go ahead, but your building control starts with your commencement notice. The Building Control Act is the primary legislation, and Section 3 sets out that subject to any dispensations or relaxations granted under Section 4 or 5 or any appeals, every building to which the building regulations apply shall be designed and constructed in accordance with the provisions of such regulations. So pretty straightforward what we need to do. So Section 6 then makes provision for the requirement to give notice to the Building Control Authority for the erection of these buildings or classes of buildings, or the carrying out of any works or classes of works. So your material alterations, material changes of use, which are specified in the regulations. So that's the Act. The Code of Practice, which is provided for under Article 20G, sets out the roles of the building owner. So the building owner is ultimately responsible, as Mairead said, and key to it is the appointment of competent builder, competent registered professionals to act as designer and as assigned certifier. So key that these people must be competent and competent for the particular building or works that are being undertaken. As Mairead said, they may be competent in one form of construction or one type of building, but the owner must ensure that they're competent for the project at hand, so specific to the works that are being undertaken. And the owner must ensure that adequate resources and competent persons are made available to design, construct, inspect and certify the building works. And adequate resources, as well as persons, includes time. So these people must be given adequate time to carry out the design and ensure that the building will perform for the 60 years that it is required. And all of these responsibilities are those of the owner. So the commencement notice is provided for in Part 2, the commencement notice and the certificates of compliance before construction. So your certificate of compliance and completion is just one certificate. We have multiple at commencement, and we'll go through those. So Part 2 set out from Articles 7 to 10, which I'm going to go through now. So Article 7, so this part applies to the erection of a building, material alteration or extension of a building, and material change of use of a building to which the building regulations apply. So that is the key. The building regulations must apply, otherwise you don't need a commencement notice. And this part shall not apply to works or buildings as regards which a material change of use takes place, where the works or the material change of use are exempt development for the purposes of the Planning and Development Acts. And Part 3 of the Building Control Regulations do not apply. That is, they don't need a fire safety certificate. Again, you won't need to put in a commencement notice. And this part applies to works in connection with material alteration of a shop, office or industrial building, to which Part 3, again, fire safety certificates apply. So Article 8 then is the obligation to give notice, and again, it's the person who intends to carry out the works. So it is the owner of the building, the person who's commissioning it, shall give to the Building Control Authority in whose functional area the works or building are or to be situated. Notice in writing. So that's the first instance. Make sure you know exactly where your site is located and you're submitting to the correct local authority. So the timelines are not less than 14 days and not more than 28 days before the commencement of the works or the material change of use. And that is the construction works to which building regulations apply. So 14 to 28 days, with the exception of a 7-day notice, which is under Article 20A. So that's the exception in Article 8. Article 9 is the most important because this sets out the form of the commencement notice. And there's a lot in Article 9, and everybody should be familiar with the contents of Article 9. Both owners, their design team, the building control officers, everybody involved should be familiar with this. So the commencement notice shall be filed electronically on the BCMS or can be set out as per the second schedule. So you can submit a hard copy. And it shall be accompanied by plans, calculations, specifications, and particulars. So not just a couple of drawings or a few documents. It has plans, calculations, specifications, and particulars as are necessary to outline how the proposed works or building will comply with the requirements of the second schedule to the building regulations. So not your planning drawings, not any kind of indicative drawings. They must demonstrate compliance with the second schedule of the building regulations. And these include your plans, sections, and elevations. So again, the drawings should include all of these. The schedule, which is the schedule of these plans, calculations, specifications, and particulars, as are currently designed or are to be prepared at a later date. So not just what you have to hand, but the full remit of what you will have going forward. So while you can submit a hard copy, you must complete the online assessment via the Building Control Management System, which outlines your approach to compliance with the requirements of the second schedule. Your preliminary inspection plan, which is prepared by the assigned certifier, and the certificates, which are the Certificate of Compliance Design, your assignment of your assigned certifier, your builder, the undertakings by those people, and the fee, which is if required under Part 5. So that's the contents of Article 9. So Article 9 then goes on to say the requirements for that documentation apply to the following works and buildings. So the design and construction of a new dwelling, extension to a dwelling which involves a floor area greater than 40 square metres, or works to which Part 3 fire safety certificates apply. And these are our commencement notices with compliance documentation. So the full remit of what we've just outlined in Article 9 there. We know that there's been provision in the case of the single dwelling to submit a commencement notice with a declaration of intention to opt out. We won't be dealing with that today because we don't have certificate of compliance and completion in these cases. So that's the opt-out. But we will look at the 7-day notice, which again has similar requirements with the addition of your statutory declaration, and I'll go through that as well. So moving on then, the building control regulations. The 7-day notice, as I referred to, says that you can submit before the grant of a relevant fire safety certificate. So you have applied for your fire safety certificate, and the two extra points here are that you must have a valid application for the fire safety certificate and you must submit the statutory declaration. So they're the two additional parts when you're submitting a 7-day notice. The timelines, again, 7 days, the clue is in the name, rather than your 14 to 28 days. So it's any time after 7 days. And these are provided for in Part 3A. So the 7-day notice, as I said, submitted to the Building Control Authority in respect of all works to which Part 3 applies, so the fire safety certificate, before it's granted and not less than 7 days before you intend to commence. And that's Article 20A. Goes on similarly to say filed electronically on the Building Control Management System or set out as per the third schedule. But other than the application for your fire safety certificate and your statutory declaration, very similar to Article 9 set out in 20A, the requirements for your documentation, your plan sections, elevations, your calculations, particulars, your schedule, online assessment, preliminary inspection plan and certificates and notices. So the BCMS then is the tool by which you can submit your commencement notice to the local authority, and provides for a minimum of 3 documents to be uploaded. But the onus is on you to ensure that you're demonstrating compliance in full. So all the documents uploaded via the BCMS, and this is just before you check that you have everything that you require to comply with the requirements of Article 9 before you pay and submit. So at that point, the Building Control Authority's responsibilities kick in then, and they're under Article 10, which is the procedure on receipt of notice. So on receipt of a commencement notice, a Building Control Authority shall record the date of receipt of the notice and consider whether the notice complies with the requirements of Article 9. So you've already done your checks that you've complied with Article 9. The Building Control Authority must satisfy themselves that you comply with the requirements of Article 9. Where the Building Control Authority consider that the commencement notice complies with the requirements, they will send to the person an acknowledgement stating the date of receipt of the notice. Where they consider that the commencement notice does not comply with Article 9, they may respond within 7 days, or 12 if it is a hard copy, and they can respond by electronic means, giving the person notice that the commencement notice has failed to comply. So it's either deemed to be invalid by the Building Control Authority and they're not accepting it, or that they require a revised notice or additional documentation or fee as necessary to comply. And where they serve the notice, they return the fee and the documentation. So the framework for Building Control Authority then and the Code of Practice set out clearly the validation process on receipt of the documentation. And again, as Mairead said, validation relates solely to the completedness of the application in terms of the material submitted. So it's not the technical assessment of the documentation, but they will do a check of the documentation that comes in. So again, in the Code of Practice, no requirement or obligation on the Building Control Authority to carry out a desktop or technical assessment of the plans and other documents submitted. And from the Building Control Authority's perspective, any of the documentation lodged will be available to them should they select the building for inspection or assessment, technical assessment. Says it again that the building owner is ultimately responsible. So the documentation that's submitted, the owner must ensure that that documentation demonstrates compliance with the requirements of the building regulations. So the form of the commencement notice itself from SI 9 2014, the important issue here that I want to point out is the commencement date. So as I said, the timeline's 14 to 28 days. Please ensure that you put the correct date in before submitting. So the commencement date for the phase must be within the statutory timelines. And the most important is the schedule of documentation. So question 6 there, the form, your schedule should be in that form. And we'll go through that in a little bit more detail. But again, it is the owner who's giving the notice and signing. So it's very important when you're uploading on the BCMS actually to make sure that all pages of these commencement notices are complete and uploaded. And again, the 7-day notice has the additional statutory declaration, so all pages to be uploaded. Then with regards to persons other than the building owner who have responsibilities, the Code of Practice sets these out, and our speakers later will go through this in a little bit more detail. But just to point out that the design certifier and the assigned certifier, who are both roles defined in the Code of Practice, before they sign their design certificate and their undertakings respectively, they must exercise reasonable skill, care and diligence in checking that the documentation for which they are responsible is appropriate for lodgement with the commencement notice. So again, each project will differ, and certain aspects of the building may not be designed at commencement stage, but these elements should be identified in the submission, and an indicative date of when that design will be completed. So it is important that in all cases, the level of documentation that's submitted is appropriate to the project at hand, the building or the works. And going through the documentation then, as I said, question 6 and the schedule of documents is most important because it should identify all of the design elements. And this is an example here from the document that Mairead mentioned, the support document that we've prepared ourselves. And you'll see that it should identify, it should be set out similar, as I said, to question 6, and it should identify anything that's been designed but not necessarily uploaded. It should identify the works or the design that's yet to be undertaken. So it should be clear to the building control officer if they're assessing what documentation is yet to be made available. Similarly, the professional body practice notes also have examples, so there's no excuse for getting it wrong. These are a great resource and everybody should refer to them. As I said, the design work that's due for completion and the specialist design, which will be subject to ancillary certificates, which will be again spoken about later, should be identified. And once the drawings and documentation for these designs are available, they should be submitted before the work commences. So similarly, anything that is changed or omitted should be certified and submitted before the work commences. So it is a live process from commencement to keep in contact with the Building Control Authority and to notify them of any changes or updates to the design. In terms of the drawings then, it's important that if you're only submitting drawings, that these include your calculations, your specifications, your particulars. So all of the documentation that you're submitting must cover A to M. And it makes complete sense then that you have a checklist A to M. You go through each part of the building regulations requirements and say, have I got something here that covers this? Because you need to cover A to M in your design. And when you've done that, the question is, do the drawings outline how the proposed works or building will comply with the requirements of the second schedule A to M relevant to these buildings or works? And if they don't, then you have to ask, will compliance be demonstrated in calculations, specifications or particulars that you've listed in your schedule of documents? And the answer to that must be yes. So when you're looking at your drawings, as I said, the Building Control Authority at validation are not required to do a technical assessment, but you should demonstrate, there should be information here to outline A to M. These are not planning drawings. It's not about what you're building, it's how you're building it and the performance of your building. So go through A to M and make sure that you've outlined how the building will comply on your drawings. The inspection plan, which is prepared by the assigned certifier, again must be appropriate to the nature of the building or works. There's examples in the Code of Practice, and here, as I said, we have the definitions of the assigned certifier and competent person. So the assigned certifier, competent registered professional assigned by the building owner to inspect and certify the works in accordance with the building control regulations. And the word competent is also, as Mairead said, competent for the building or works at hand. And the assigned certifier is assigned by the building owner as required under the building control regulations. And they undertake, when signing their undertaking, to inspect and to coordinate the inspection activities of others during construction and to certify that the building or works on completion. So there we go, that they are the registered professional assigned by the building owner in summary. And the notices of assignment then, it's very important that the people who are signing these are deemed competent, that they read them and that they only sign them when they know and they are satisfied that they are competent. So they must be, oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry, they're highlighted. In terms of your design certifier and your assigned certifier, these people must be registered professionals. So your registration number must appear here. So on your BCMS profile, ensure that you have your registration number included because it will populate on these forms. If they're not there, you're not demonstrating that you're registered and competent. So the design certifier who assigns the design certificate is again competent registered professional, and they confirm that all of the documentation included in the schedule has been prepared by them and other members of the design team, and that they have coordinated and prepared. So design then is an important definition to be familiar with. So I'll read it out. As the meaning assigned within the Act includes the preparation of plans, particulars, drawings, specifications, calculations, and other expressions of purpose, according to which the construction, extension, alteration, repair, or renewal concerned is to be executed, and design will be construed accordingly. So it's a comprehensive definition. Again, just focusing the competence and registration, the important things there. So later during the break, we will have a video playing of the validation process by the Building Control Authority, but they go through each of the elements listed here, and this is just a quick checklist for validation purposes. And it is checking that all of the documentation required by Article 9 has been submitted, and that all of the, as I said, the correct date is on the forms, all of the forms have been signed. So it is an administrative check for validation purposes. Just Trina Leahy from Limerick actually has prepared the video, so it's very useful for anyone in building control just to watch and listen to it as well. As I said, once they've done this, they have three options to either validate and notify the owner to invalidate, or to request submission of information or fee. So that's it. And the timelines for same, you give notice between 14 and 28 days, and the Building Control Authority have 7 days then in which to send you this notification under Article 10. So you'll see there, so week is the latest date, and sorry, it is 12 days if it's a hard copy, but the outcome of that then is that you will be entered on the register and you're ready to commence on between day 14 and 28, or in the case of your 7-day notice, anytime after your 7 days. And so then in terms of the process, so the owner, as I said, must provide the resources, and the technical challenge to build needs adequate resources assigned to it. If they fail to resource the project, then, as Mairead said, fail to prepare and prepare to fail. So in the case of your bake-off challenge, you end up with a cake that has failed, but a building is far more complex and needs to last for 60 years. So you need to use the proper materials in the proper quantities, in the proper format, and following the proper method of construction to ensure compliance. So you need to ensure that things are going into your building at the correct times. They'll be protected during the building process, and the eventual building then will perform and comply. So it is a complicated process. Moving on then, so you have your validation, you have commenced, but the process continues. So it's expected building control authorities will undertake an appropriate level of assessment and inspection informed by the risk analysis of the commencement notices. So the process continues. And this is done to ensure that they target buildings which carry the greatest risks. And again, just to point out that the Building Control Authority's inspections do not relieve the building owner, the designers and the builders from their obligations to demonstrate compliance through their own inspections, the certification and the lodgement of documentation as to how compliance has been achieved. And they can carry out desktop technical assessments. As I said, the validation process is not a technical assessment, but post-validation, the Building Control Authority can undertake the technical assessment, or they can, and then they can request any of the documentation that they deem necessary listed in the schedule of documents, including any updating of that documentation to demonstrate compliance. And their powers are confirmed under section 11, so powers of inspection by the authorised person. So the authorised person is the person in the Building Control Authority, and they are entitled to enter at all reasonable times any land for the purposes of inspecting any building and any plans or documents relating to the building. This can be done following the completion of the building, during its construction, or any time during the installation of fitting services or equipment to which the building regulations apply. And they can request from the building owner or the occupier of the building or any person responsible for the construction any documentation that they deem necessary to establish whether the requirements of the building regulations are being complied with. So they can request any of this information under their section 11 powers. So then the certificates of compliance and completion are under part 3C, and Richard will be speaking about these. But the ultimate aim is to achieve a certificate of compliance on completion because it's necessary before the building may be opened, occupied or used. And as I said, Richard will go through the requirements with regards to the certificate of compliance on completion. But in terms of your commencement notice, tu sma la na hibra, if you get it right at commencement stage, good start is half the battle. So if you have a good schedule of documents at commencement stage, you've identified all of the design elements A to M, this will feed into your annex that's required at completion, and the annex is the table of plans, calculations, specifications, your ancillary certs and particulars used for the purposes of construction, demonstrating compliance, and in particular, how the completed building or work differs from the design submitted. So as I said, it's important that any design changes are notified, and these will be listed in the annex on completion. So compliance with A to M and any differences or changes. And at commencement stage, you're outlining, but at completion stage, you're providing the evidence. Again, there's a lot of that documentation the whole day ahead to go through all of this, so I shall leave it with you there. But just to say that the onus, again, as I said, on the owner to demonstrate compliance, appoint competent persons for the design, the construction, the inspection, and the certification. So, as is the case with our cake, if we have all of the ingredients, the instructions, the methodology, this will ensure that we turn out a compliant building. And the reason that the building must be compliant is because it will last for 60 years, and we need to ensure the health, the safety, and the welfare of not just the owners, but all of the users of the buildings going forward. So all of our dwellings, our workplaces, our schools, the places where we go to relax, exercise, we spend most of our time in buildings in the modern era. So we spend 5 minutes eating a cake, and possibly some people think more about that at commencement of their process. So, Shinna will.